I heartily welcome our chief guest, Dr. Om Kumar, Assistant Professor, SRM Easwari Engineering College, Chennai, who is the speaker of today's session. And the topic is DDoS, Distributed Denial of Service. Dr. Om Kumar has specialized in the domain of cybersecurity at Anna University, Chennai, for obtaining PhD. He has done his BTech and MTech in CSE from JNTU Anantapur. His research interest spans across IoT and deep learning in particular. He has published many articles in report journals, and major of his contributions has been published in SI journals like Supercomputing, Springer, elsewhere, etc. He has participated in presenting international conferences, and in major he has contributed in IEEE, Springer, then elsewhere. He has also published 2 books pertaining to Anna University syllabus of CSE. Sir, I thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Now the session can be taken charge by our guest of speaker, Dr. Om Kumar. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Very good morning, dear faculties, research scholars, and students. Before sharing the screen, the plan for the session would be like, I've stipulated it to 2 hours with say like 1 to 1.5 hour of a discussion through PPT and 15 to 20 minutes of an hands-on session through Anaconda Navigator, and probably the last 10 minutes plus whatever doubts you have. I can extend it beyond the stipulated time. If time permits, I'll try to rush it through and finish it up, the theory part, as quick as possible. So in the middle, if you have any doubts, my flow is I am planning to have the query session at the last, but if you feel you're missing the flow and if you need the doubt to be cleared immediately, you can stop me at any point of time. So moving on, I'm sharing the screen. Is my screen and audio both visible?
Yes, sir, it's visible. Yes, friends.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Students. Yeah.
Well, the agenda of the today's presentation would be like we'll be seeing some introduction on DDoS, followed by what has motivated me to take this a topic. Obviously, I have to give you certain statistics of the impact of DDoS currently across the globe. And then we are moving on to the actual problem statement, the objectives and need of the study. Then before moving into the technical part, that is the algorithm, we need to classify certain things, taxonomies, floodings, all this. We'll be discussing those classifications. And then we are proposing the topic to start with autoencoders. So the algorithm part would be different kinds of autoencoders, and I am concentrating on one particular thing. So this is the agenda. So basically, what is a flash event? A flash event is defined as a sudden exponential growth of requests on a particular resource. So what does this mean? We have a sale from Amazon currently going on. So it is a big sale. We even have the Flipkart that is going at the backdrop. So all this are planned events. So they declare upfront saying like they are about to start this event, which will have so many offers and they'll sell these kind of products. So that is a planned event. But there are certain events in which certain events, the traffic might be very high. So it might cause the resource to go down, the network to deteriorate, all this. So that particular thing where your request grows exponentially. So if I use a particular resource, an instance in a cloud, which is capable of taking out, say, 10,000 requests per second. And if I am seeing a lakh request per second, then that instance is not capable of handling the request. So that kind of a situation is nothing but a flash event. So the problem is this might even be taken as an attack. Seeing it positively, this can be an event. But nowadays, people are using this as an attack. So what they do, if I am a Microsoft person and my competitor is an AWS. So Azure people, this is just an example. I, as a competitor, I can generate a lot of packets, which is nothing but requests, which ultimately goes and ends at the destination. So what the destination would be facing is it will have voluminous number of requests so that it is unable to respond periodically. So if I have a pattern, say like a packet is coming, it is getting introduced, and then an acknowledgement. This is a kind of a protocol. But once a packet is received, and if the process of acknowledging it is on the way, if I receive another batch of 100 packets, so then my system will go in a queue to handle those 100. Similarly, while handling that 100, if I have another batch of 10,000 requests, so this scenario is nothing but a flash attack. That is nothing but flash crowd attack. So it is again a DDoS kind of an attack that floods the application at the victim with numerous number of requests. So when we flood them with such kind of scenario, obviously they'll not be in a position to respond. So the implications of this flash crowd attack involves resource utilization. Why? Because you are launching your particular code through an instance, and we plan that that instance could have been used by some number of requests per minute. But since there is a lot of DDoS requests on that particular instance, so the resource utilization would be definitely high than the measured value. So if the request is very high, obviously the computation cost, say for example, I as an Anna University website, if I release my results, before the release of the results, obviously the web page would be fine. This I've even seen in JNTU results. So mostly in all kind of university results, we go with the calculation stating that we are releasing results of the second year. So obviously second year students in a college might be 120 students. Across all branches, it might be 1,000 students. So if I have 600 colleges affiliated to an university, 600 into this 100. So that will be the count. So we give a surplus amount, say double. Say if 10,000 is the request count, I might allocate 20,000 requests per second as a bandwidth, stating the student can check the result, or the student's parent, someone from another device, can enter their roll number and see the results. But what is happening now is, due to the proliferation of these IoT devices, which are nothing but the handheld devices, the PDAs, mobile phones and everything, a single person is available in multiple places. I am available in my Gmail at through my mobile. I am obviously available at through my official email ID parallelly, and then even in social websites. So this is not possible actually long back, because we did not have these IoT devices in this way. Now, due to the technical advancements, what is happening is a single person is available in multiple places. So my resource utilization normally is going very high. And if these kind of DDoS attacks are hitting my instances, again, that would cause a very big deterioration, due to which the computation cost might increase. Obviously, the next example which we discussed, these university results, what will happen is, if I am not able to provide service to the students as an university, I might deploy my results in a server, or I might outsource my particular that code or a set of DB database to another third party source. But that third party source will also again have a count which they have to satisfy through a service level agreement. What will happen is, if we are not able to provide service to the students in terms of result declaration, uh, the server what it does is it gives you a latency. It is not able to display the results. Obviously, when there is a latency, there will be an algorithm which will try to do a hop. A hop is nothing but your request would be redirected to another website in a different place, in a different zone, in a different form. So if you are requesting your results from Madanpalli, and if JNTU server is not able to respond to you within say 5 seconds or 10 seconds, normally in a service level agreement kind of a situation, the JNTU server is supposed to redirect the incoming request of the student to another host where the base is supposed to be replicated, and they have to give you a service. So initially, if you hit me directly, I might give you a service of 5 seconds. But when I redirect your request and there you move to a different zone, obviously there will be a delay due to this transcontinental hop. So the implications are over resource utilization, high computation cost, obviously the basic latency, and due to latency, we have to search for resources by hopping into different zones. So as discussed, the motivation is the proliferation of IoT devices. IoT devices are mobile phones, PDAs, everything. What they're doing is they're causing dynamic cloud outages due to DDoS. DDoS is a kind of a DOS. It basically comes from denial of service. A denial of service is a concept where a single victim, a single person, a single system is being targeted from a single source. But this then became much bigger into distributed, where a single destination is being targeted not from a single source, but from different sources across the globe. So that is distributed denial of service. So today's cloud, they are facing the dynamic cloud outages. We see at times Facebook going down even 2 days ago for more than 6 hours. Facebook is going down and everything. There is no glitch in terms of technical aspects, but still we are not able to experience the service for which we are paying. It is because the cloud at times they get a lot of requests due to which they move to an unresponsive state. And this is nowadays highly possible because of this IoTs. IoT is causing IoT botnets. So a botnet is a term where a bot is nothing but a robot. A robot is not a physical robot. In terms of computer science, it is a code which is meant to do a particular function. So that functionality, what it is supposed to do and achieve, is decided by an admin. So I might instruct a device to do some work, but basically a device might not listen to me. So to make it listen to my instruction, what I do is I write a script with malwares into it. Malware is again a code through which the device gets compromised, gets corrupted, and it listens to my instruction. So I'm giving you another example for this in terms of IoT, how IoT is becoming IoT botnets. So there are so many baby monitors, thermostats, webcams, your handheld watches, all this. They are IoT devices basically. Why? Because they are low in memory. They do not have 8 GB RAM or 1 TB hard disks into it. The computation power is very less. The memory consumption, the memory given to that particular device is also very less. So what will happen is these devices are not intelligent. There are firmwares basically where the chip would be written with a code stating if you are a watch, you are supposed to function in this way. And if you're not functioning in this way, it is a error. Say like my battery might have gone or my watch would have been into water or something like this. So when these kind of events happen, it gives you a different signal. But in normal functioning time, if I run a script which gets into IoT device. So as discussed, my IoT devices are connected to internet. So through internet, if I send a script and if that script is unchecked, those devices gets compromised, and I can use a list of compromised devices to bring down a destination. Long back, this scenario, this denial of service and DDoS, distributed denial of service, they were tried by professionals across globe through many companies. So people used to hire companies for causing such havoc. But nowadays, what is happening is, due to this IoT devices, there's no such thing called there is a company which is meant to do like this. There is a country called China which always does like this. This is not the scenario currently. If you want to bring down a destination, all I need is say a big computer. But if I have a computer, obviously I have to connect that computer through an internet. So if I connect it with a legal internet, you can trace me back and say like, you are the person who is causing me a lot of requests, and I can sue you. But to avoid this, what they do is they go through proxy and they try to attack me. So this is the overall scenario, and this malicious through this activities, they perform many malicious activities like malware attacks, social engineering attacks, distributed denial service of attacks, even sending spam emails. So what happens is, through all these things, my malware, which is supposed to compromise your IoT device, gets succeeding in compromising the device. So a little bit statistics. Cisco, uh, if you are going through computer networks, I hope you're aware of this term called Cisco. Its annual report as of 2018 and 2023 states the number of security violations and the number of documents or records accessed through these breaches are likely to double. Breach, I say, is a security vulnerability. It is supposed to double. So what was 7.9 billion in 2018 is about to spike to 15.4 billion records. So think of the breach and think of the total number of requests. Next, there is another industry called Spam House. It is a leading industry for filtering spam emails. So spam emails, I hope you know, from an email through your text, we classify the words mentioned in the email, whether it is, we give them a count based on the value that is returned. We say whether it is a positive or a negative. Similarly, there are certain emails which are being forwarded in bulk. Say, for example, you have received 1 lakh or 1 million euros um, cashback, offer, price. So these are keywords which are normally not discussed among individual emails. So they are used in bulks. So a Google email basically runs a spam email checking filter at the background, and then by default it classifies an email as a spam, or is it a promotion, or is it an update from your bank. This is how it classifies. So there is an industry called Spam House to do this. That was hit by a DDoS attack with a traffic flooding of 300 Gbps. I again have to give you an insight here. It is Gbps, gigabits per second. So if we are using your home router, probably we might have 100 Mbps. Somewhere around we are even receiving 1 Gbps. I'm talking about rural places. So we haven't seen people receiving 200, 300 Gbps speed of internet. But now a company is receiving requests, a flooding DDoS request at 300 Gbps. So look at the traffic rate. Again, the none other than giant AWS, Amazon Web Service, as on February 20, was targeted by Connection Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. So that is the term that they have mentioned. So what they did is, by using this technique, an attack prolonged for 3 days. And again, for 3 days, it was not just 300 Gbps this time, it was terabits per second, 2.3 terabits per second. So from Mbps to GPPS, and from GPPS last year itself we have seen TPPS. So this year we are yet to get any info as of now, but we might move even to petabits per second. So the problem statement is this presence of DDoS attack in network traffic is manifested basically as network traffic becoming volatile and bursty. So bursty is nothing but spikes. So there is not a consistent pattern between the instance and the device. Normally, if I get say 10 requests per second, I might get 15 at times, or I might get 5 at times. But this normal pattern is becoming bursty. At times I get 10, suddenly due to big billion day, I get 10 lakh. Okay, since it's big billion day, if I increase my resource to 20 lakh, the request again goes down to 100. This is a big problem. Why? Because in such kind of situations, you cannot find out when this flash attack occurs. Why this flash attack is occurring? Only if you find out why, you can rectify it. Till what time this gets extended? Who is doing it? So there are a lot of questions here, and it is unanswerable because the basic motto behind this is to bring down a destination. So when you want to do such kind of activities, you will not reveal your identity. So the only way is I have to target you through a voluminous number of requests. So that request will not be a static, stable, consistent request. It will become volatile and bursty. So handling a volatile and bursty request is really difficult because, as said, the request spikes. From 10 it might go to lakh, from lakh it might again fall down to 1000, from 1000 it might go to 2 lakh. So in this case, what will happen is, how will you scale your resources? So if it is at 10, my algorithm might say the instance to serve it at some pace. But if it grows to 1 lakh, obviously my scaling algorithm, auto scaling in cloud, what it does is it replicates your resource into many resources. So this will take a time. After replicating and copying it down into many instances, and by the time I give you a service, if the requests go down, then what is the use of replicating it? Because if I replicate, I have to pay. So there will be a cost that is incurred. So after replicating, when I'm about to service you, if the request goes down, then I could have normally done it with my normal resource before I scaled it. So that now what happens is this is again becoming a problem. So obviously this will go down to a stage where your server might hang up or crash down. So this particular topic is to detect and control malicious traffic. Malicious traffic is nothing but traffics that are generated from IoT devices with an intent of bringing down a destination by developing efficient working models and predictive strategies. So the concept is on machine learning and deep learning too. So this is the objective. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take you through autoencoders. So, and then I am trying to deploy it into AWS, making it an adaptive filter, which is running as a filter. A filter, an algorithm which is functioning as a filter. It filters out malicious requests and allows only legitimate requests to pass. So when my filter passes out genuine requests to instances, instances health would be utilized efficiently, which means if I am supposed to serve you 10 requests per second, and if I'm receiving 100 requests, out of which say 50 is malicious, I might cut down those 50 and I might forward only 50 requests to my instances. Now, this instance is capable of sending 10 requests per second. So in the next 5 seconds, all these requests would have been served. So this is the basic plan. And this is the need of the study too. So there will be stealthy utilization of computing resources, so which affects the performance of the system. Obviously, there will be an immediate setback due to the delayed service. And on the other hand, due to this, there will be a transcontinental hopping too. So we have discussed this. Now I'm moving on to taxonomy of botnet. So I've already given you an insight on bot. So a bot Net is something, if I've compromised a particular device, say a webcam, by sending a script, since the webcam is connected to internet, if the internet firewall is not that strong, I can send a malware through which that device gets compromised. So when it gets compromised, it becomes a bot. It listens to my instruction. So after compromising a device, this bot, it turns and checks its vicinity. So when one webcam is compromised, what I do is I will try to check, do I have any other webcams within the limit? So in that case, if I find anything, I'll apply the same procedures to the other webcams which have not been corrupted as of now. But after compromising them through my malware, what happens is all these bots form a network which is nothing but bot net. And now what I achieve is, rather than targeting a destination with a single device, I now target them through a group of device. So that group is nothing but botnet. And this botnet technique is generally classified as honeypot based systems, intrusion detection systems. So I'm pretty sure that you've come across this term called IDS. If you are into second year or third year, probably you should have come across this. Basically, an IDS is something which is a kind of a firewall that is run at network level. So they'll have algorithms to filter out these malicious kind of requests. That is basically who is intruding into my system. To find out them, we have a solution called intrusion detection system. Uh, this intrusion detection system is classified into anomaly based and signature based. So basically a signature based detection works on signature. So if I say I am handling a sync flood or an ICMP flood, they'll have a signature because it follows a pattern. So a pattern is basically technically a signature. So if I receive a packet in such a signature, and if it is malicious, I conclude based on the signature that it is a kind of a malware. But this is nowadays not possible because long back we had this terms called virus, antivirus softwares, all this. But what is happening currently is, I'm sorry, 1 minute. What is happening currently is we are not able to come and find out what kind of virus are we currently facing. Long back, we had some list of stagnant viruses. Say this is some kind of a Trojan, this is some kind of spyware, all this. But this is now exhausted. Why? Because all the antivirus software, what they do is they try to find out a solution. They reverse engineer your virus code and they filter out such kind of EXEs, executable files. So rather than if you are coming out with signature, I can find out certain number of malicious requests. But this signature is out of date. Why? Because today's malware are changing their signature in such a way that if you come out with a code, it is changing its signature again. So this is a kind of a COVID. So if you come out with a particular vaccine on that particular human being, it works in a different way. Again, if you go and find out that it is working on a different way on a human being in a different zone, say Australia or somewhere else, the same COVID is working on a different pace. So initially we had saying like in hot conditions, we were not able to survive, but in cold conditions, again, they had a lot of peaks. Similarly, this signature based malwares, they have a particular pattern and the antivirus software what runs at the foreground, they filter out based on the signature. But if you filter out in that way, what will happen is the intruder will not achieve his particular goal. So he tries to launch scripts which keeps changing its signature. So in that case, we have to go for something called an anomaly based detection. What is basically an anomaly is, an anomaly is something that is deviating from the normal behavior. If you have a pattern and if you behave in that pattern, that is your normal behavior. But if you're not behaving according to the given set of patterns, then you're deviating from it. That deviation is nothing but anomaly. So now what we are doing is, rather than finalizing saying like this is the signature of the device, and if it behaves in this way, then that is this malware. So if you are affected by this malware, all these are the measures that you're supposed to do. Rather than doing it in this way, what we are trying to do is, we are trying to find out the behavior of the normal traffic. And if the normal traffic behavior deviates at any point of time, then we say them as an anomaly. So today's session, again, I am digging down deep here in this way into network based monitoring. So host based monitoring, people are not doing it. Why? Because this is something like your Apple watches or something. So if it gets corrupted, it ends into one particular device. So similarly, I can attack all the end devices, and they are not into a network, but they are into a host. It becomes an proprietary into your site. But whereas if I take a networking model, I can still try to stop the request at network level. That is why I'm trying to handle it here in this session. But there are techniques which can be handled here. This again is completely a different strategy. Honeypot. Uh, Honeypot is something where your servers come out with a description saying like they are in a honeypot. Say for example, I try to build a server which is trying to behave like a normal server. So when I replicate a normal server into real time, if my server is supposed to be brought down by some targeted people, they might think that the server that I am hosting currently is the actual server. So what they do is they'll try to put out all their powers and techniques to bring down this particular server. So now my server is being encountered by a lot of different compromising strategies. But what I do is as I said, I replicate my server's content, my DB, my everything is replicated, and it is copied into a duplicate server, which is nothing but a honeypot. So this honeypot attracts hackers, and hackers, they put down all their strength and techniques on this server to bring down them. Now what I do is, at the backdrop, if I try to find out how they are attacking my particular database, I can really rectify that particular weak link into my original server, and then I might release my original server in a better way. So this is the basic principle of this honeypot. I'm moving on. There is something called IRC botnet, Internet Relay Chat botnet. There is famous peer-to-peer botnet. This, I think I need not give you an example. Best is the torrent, HTTP botnet, IoT botnet. So currently we are into IoT botnet. So I'm just giving you another statistics. There is something called a water torture flooding using Mirai. Mirai is Mirai Bashlight. They are current IoT malwares which are changing their signatures even till date. It is not within India, it is throughout the globe, and none of the companies, they are not able to find a solution to this IoT Mirai and Bashlight malware. So this water torture flooding was used through Mirai, and it compromised an USDNS provider, which many Fortune 500 companies such as Airbnb, Netflix, PayPal, Visa, Amazon, New York Times, everybody were using. So they were all at some point of time, they were facing this particular attack called water torture. So I am trying to move it out. I'm not sure what is the time. It is 10:45. So if I try to give you more details here, probably, yeah, okay. See, I'm just rushing up so that if you have any doubts, I'll try to clarify it at the end of the session. So UDP flooding is a kind of a flooding where user datagram protocol is being flooded across your particular destination so that you are overwhelmed with many requests and you go into unresponsive state. Again, ICMP flooding is one kind of flooding. So if it is flooding, it is going to flood you with huge number of requests. But how it is going to flood is varying. UDP has a different strategy. ICMP uses ECMO packets. Similarly, there is something called sink flooding. So this is a little bit different. I'm just trying to give you an insight on this. Basically, a sink flooding attack is established where a TCP connection is forwarded and a sink request is forwarded to the server. So when I give a synchronous request to the server in turn should respond to my sink request as a sink acknowledgement response. But this is supposed to be the normal pattern. So after giving a sink, I should get a sink acknowledgement in turn. So if this communication goes in a normal way, finally there should be a final acknowledgement response stating that every link is closed, every communication between us is closed. So this is how packets between two devices, they communicate. But normally in the sink flooding, what happens is I wanted to bring you down. So we both talk in terms of this protocol called sink. So in sink, I would generate a sink request to you and you should respond with a sink acknowledgement back. I will again give a sink and you will give me a sink acknowledgement. After this is done, you're supposed to give me a final ACK. Before you releasing the final ACK, what I do is I'll send another batch of requests to you. So when I give you a batch, it means a set of sync packets. So you have to give back sync acknowledgements to me. So your device will be very busy in responding according to protocol. So since it has got a huge number of sync packets, it would be responding back by sync acknowledgements. But this sync acknowledgement, if I've received 500, I would have returned back 500 sync acknowledgement packets. But after this 500 is to 500 is over, there should be one final ACK response. So which states that the communication is closed. Before that communication is getting closed, I'll give you another batch. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep you busy. So when I keep you busy, you means a resource, an instance. Say for example, you are a server who's servicing students for their results. So 100 students are legitimate students who are supposed to get service. So I keep you busy in this way through sync flooding. And what happens is these 100 people who are supposed to get legitimate service from you, you might not service them. Why? Because I am continuously flooding you with huge number of packets. So this is where you at some point of time will lose these 100 customers or you will go down to an unresponsive state. So we are moving into the technical part of the algorithm now. Have anyone come across the term called autoencoder? Fine. No. Because okay, I have to give you a lot of information if you do not know. That is why I just wanted to know. An autoencoder is a basic deep learning algorithm. What is deep learning is it is very, very deep. That is why they call them as deep learning. A machine learning is just input, hidden layer and output layer. But a deep learning is input, lot of hidden layers and an output layer. So when you have lot of hidden layers, the learnings would be very deep. The intuitions that you learn from them would be very, 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 very deep so that you recognize all latent features of a particular representation. In this scenario,
sorry
yes,
to interrupt, sir. Sorry to interrupt. This deep learning again, our students will be having a webinar tomorrow, like the same session. This is about deep learning. They'll be discussing. About this deep learning, again tomorrow they'll be having a webinar, sir. They'll be
Okay.
coming about to know about it.
Okay, sir. Yeah, maybe
Yeah, yes, thank
through
you.
this knowledge, they might be able to understand the tomorrow session much better. At least, say, a group of 5 students might take this as a project. That is my only motto. I am trying to give you an insight. Let us see. Um, yes, see, an autoencoder is basically a deep learning technique. So I told you like what is a deep learning, how it is different from machine learning. This autoencoder is an unsupervised ANN that learns to efficiently compress the data. So why do we need to compress data means, just follow my mouse pointer. So your original input will be encoded, and then you will have a decoder to decode the encoded input, and then you will have a normal output. This is the normal flow. But in deep learning, what they do is they compress the data. So if I have a data, it means it will have say 100 features. So if I have 100 features, after learning the latent representations of all those 100 features, what is your color, what is your weight, what is your height, how do you speak, how much time you wake up, how fast you walk, these are all features of you. So if I talk features of students at MIT, that will be a different category. So I'm talking about the features. So if there are 100 features for a particular person, I need to compress them. Without compression, what will happen is these 100 features would have been learned. So I'll have 100 buckets to learn these 100 features. After learning it completely, these 100 buckets will be included in a computation to find out a prediction. But what is happening here is 100 inputs, 100 buckets. So obviously, if your input is very high, today's traffic, today's complexity, today's problems, they are mostly solvable only by neural networks. A neural network is a basic starting of your deep learning. They'll have synapse, neurons, dendrites, all this, uh, through which they learn many representations. So these 100 features and 100 buckets, if I have 10,000 features, again, I have to have 10,000 buckets. So this is more or less a proportional thing. So this autoencoder, what it does is it compresses these 100 features, say to 50 through this encoder. So I have my 100 features here. Through this encoder, my 100 features are compressed here to say 20 or 30. From this 20 to 30, I decode them and produce an output which is very similar to input. So what is happening here is if this is not here, what I mean this is if this encoder, compression and decoder is not there, what will happen is you have to get back your original output just by using the full features. But through autoencoder, what you do is you compress all the features to a subset, and from the subset, you are trying to rebuild a output which is very close to input. So where can you use it? Ipo, how do I tell you? There is something called a cancer therapy, where from a thigh tissue, they take that your tissues and your cells in your body behave in this way. From those particular thigh tissues, they try to develop a lot of skins for cancer patients. If they are running out of scalps tissues somewhere, they grow these tissues and they put it there. So similarly, this encoder, what it does is it compresses say 100 features to 10 or 20. So in terms of 100, this is very easy. But if you have lakhs and lakhs of features, if I'm trying to build a database based on this population on Aadhaar card, so look at one Aadhaar card, I'll have at least 10 to 15 features. So in terms of millions and millions of population, how many number of features? You have to visualize them as a matrix. We might have come across 2 into 2 matrix, but now one person is having 15 attributes roughly. If that person is having 100 attributes, and if I have millions of people, think of my matrix. How should I input such a value to a system? That is the difficulty now. So in such kind of a difficulty, because we are facing such kind of problems now, in such kind of difficulty, the normal machine learning techniques might not work. That is where this autoencoder comes into picture. And what this autoencoder does is basically feature extraction through compression. So this 100 features are compressed to say 10 or 20. There you will have a algorithm, a background core, which tells you out of these 100 features to decide whether this person is a student of MIT, we need to take out these 20 features. If these 20 features values are so and so, I can conclude that he is an MIT student. If these 20 features are giving me a value something from this, say like it is so and so, in that case I can conclude that he is not a student of an MIT. So rather than go through all the 100 features, which might take say 100 seconds, I now conclude that within 20 seconds that you are a student of an MIT or you're not a student of an MIT. So this, think it in terms of real-time problems, how much time I save. In terms of hardwares, how much resource I optimize. Rather than using the full features, if I use full features, I have to do a lot of computation. Again, if you do a lot of computation, there'll be a lot of time and cost that is involved. So this particular algorithm called autoencoder through deep learning, it extracts essential features. The underlying term is essential features, which is supposed to prevalently tell you that, yes, this is this system. Fine, I'm moving on. There are many kind of autoencoders. Basic autoencoder. A basic autoencoder is basically what we have discussed as of now. It's a deep learning autoencoder. But after this basic autoencoder, we had a lot of variants. Stacked autoencoder. So what I told you is, see here, this autoencoder is a basic autoencoder. What if I put another autoencoder on this? One autoencoder itself is reducing the 100 features to 20. And if this 20 is given to another autoencoder, that 20 might have been reduced to 10. If the 10 is passed, so finally I might come to a place which cannot be reduced anywhere. And that would be my optimized set of features to find out whether this person is a male or a female or a senior citizen or a middle-aged person, something like this. So putting on a autoencoder on top of another autoencoder is nothing but stacked autoencoder. So that is nothing but one on another. So what I do is I put 2 or 3 or 5 or 100 autoencoders one on the other. So once autoencoder's output would be an input to the next autoencoder. That is stacking. There is something called variational autoencoder. What it is basically used in identifying the underlying probability distribution, say like Gaussian. If your traffic is having some kind of probability, in that case, only to identify the distribution pattern, we might use variational autoencoder. There is something called sparse autoencoder. This sparse autoencoder we'll be looking deep in the forthcoming slides because I've tried to give you an algorithm and a demonstration on it. I'll just discuss it in the forthcoming slides. I'm just moving on. Denoising autoencoder is another kind of an autoencoder where you corrupt the input. So all these autoencoders that we have discussed till now, they do not corrupt input. They just learn the features. They reduce the features into a subset. From subset, they try to build an output which is very close to input. So I am getting an output which is not built on the entire set of features, but it is obtained from a subset of features. So when from a subset of features, if I'm getting an output which is very close to input, then this is an efficient way. All this is normal, but in denoising, this particular subset can be corrupted. So it means your system is giving you ways to add malwares into it. And then you try to learn the behavior, how it is getting corrupted and how it is responding to it. There are so many things like convolutional autoencoder, vanilla autoencoder, undercomplete autoencoder, and contractive. I'm not going into it detail because I'm not sure whether you're understanding it or not. So I'm just giving you out the basic ideas. Yeah. Now moving on to sparse autoencoder. So sparse autoencoder is again a kind of an autoencoder. So this particular architecture that we have discussed is still applicable here. So I'm trying to give you a scenario. What will happen if basically this 100 features are being learned? In terms of neural networks, when an event happens, a neuron triggers. So triggers means it is firing. Firing in the sense it is a learning. So when an action or an event happens, a neuron fires, and when there is a fire means a neuron is getting triggered. So when it is getting triggered, obviously the machine will try to learn. This is how a normal autoencoder behaves. But in sparse autoencoder, there is something called sparse penalty. So a sparse penalty is induced into autoencoder where this penalty value is maintained very close to zero. In my case, what we are going to demonstrate here, I've maintained the sparse penalty as 0.005. It's not 0.5, it's 0.005. So it is more or less very close to zero. So when it is very close to zero, in terms of binary language, zero means it is not getting ignited. 1 means it is in active state. When it is 1, it is active. If it is active, the neuron triggers. When neuron triggers, there is something that is learned. But normally for every pattern, autoencoder triggers. But since I have a sparse penalty here, which is very close to zero, a sparse penalty value which is very close to zero. Obviously, Appo, your value will be very close to zero. So when it is very close to zero, you will be in inactive state, which means you do not trigger and there is no learning happening. So when this is not done, what is happening is you're not wasting time in learning patterns that are redundant. So your machine will get triggered to events that are unique. So when it is unique, it means you learn all the latent representations of that particular event. So when it is not unique, if it is redundant, your machine can say that I have already come across a set of frames like this. And from the knowledge that I already have, I can give you an answer. So there is a computation that is getting reduced. So that is what we are trying to come out here through sparse penalty. So I'm giving you another architecture here through which we have established this AWS. We have set up a virtual private server in AWS. So this is your bot master. So what a bot master does is it sits on command and control server and it does a scan on all your IoT devices. So as I said, you will have webcam, thermostat, baby monitor, smart watches, everything that is getting connected to internet. So if I sit on any server and if I initiate a scanner, so this scanner module, what it does is, see here, it does a brute force login. Basically a brute force login is on a particular device, I send a request. And if I get a response from that particular device, I'll get who that device is. Basically, that is how communication works. It responds with an IP stating that I am so-and-so device. So with that IP, I can say like that device is located in this zone, this region, and it is in so-and-so vicinity. So if I get that information, I pass it on to my bot master, where this bot master will have a list to tell you whether this victim is already compromised or he has not been compromised. So if this IP is new, then my scanner will initiate loader module. A loader module is where the malwares are scripted to compromise your device. So the scanner will instruct the loader. The loader will load the malware into the device. So this is where your this loader will load the malware, and this victim device now will have my malware loaded into it. So it will communicate with the CNC where a bot master will now give instructions, say DDoS. So this device will now send request and target a particular destination. So this particular 48101, 2380, all these are ports through which generally the brute force login will be initiated. So this is again an algorithm for sparse autoencoder. So you will have a lot of features, say like input features, learning rate, number of layers, unit type, number of output layers, hidden layers, decaying parameter, sparse penalty, desired sparse penalty. This is just a list of most important set of features. But apart from that, there are so many features that are being provided as input. So if these are provided as input, I then set my number of layers, my number of neurons in the input and the hidden layers. If these are set, I have to give these inputs. Then I have to initialize my unit type, my lambda, my beta, my rho, epsilon, optimization methods, everything. So after initializing this, now my hidden layer and input layer neurons are ready to learn. So I have to give them some weights and biases. So that has been provided by using epsilon. So after doing all these things, I do a feed forward pass. So what happens is I try to calculate the activations, how a particular hidden layer behaves to an input to produce an output. This I try to learn through activation functions, say tanh, softmax, all this. So in learning this, what happens is there will be an output, that is the observed output and the expected output. My observed output might be 80%, but my expected output might be 90. So there is a difference. So for that, you need to have a formula to calculate what is the error rate. So we are using a mean square error here for that. So if the mean square error is beyond certain limit, what we do is we again back propagate, which means we again back propagate here. We adjust the weights and bias, and then we again do a feed forward pass. After doing this, we'll have activations, and that is being calculated here. If this value is negligible, we will move on. If this value is not negligible, it is huge. If the error value is huge, we again and again back propagate. So when back propagating, I try to fine tune my system to a closed expected behavior pattern. So I might expect it to land at 90, but it is landing at 70. So I'll go back and I'll fine tune certain values and parameters so that this time it grows from 70 to 75. From 75, again I fine tune, and I might not be able to make it 90% accurate, but I might at least end up at 83.5 or 84.7, something like this. That is nothing but back propagating and then coming again. So with 70% of the input, I back propagate and I improve myself to 75. With 75, I back propagate and I improve, become 84.7. This is basically a back propagation. So if at certain point of time, I've learned all set of features, so I'll move on to set a threshold. Say if my value is beyond 70, I might classify the incoming request as malicious. If it is less than 70, I might say it is genuine. So that is how you set up a threshold. If the MSE value is greater than threshold, I classify them as botnet. So how do you basically classify them is basically by using Fisher's score. A Fisher score is a value between 0 to 1. It is, I'll try to give you more insight here. You will not able to be understand. See, this is an archive from UCI. This is one of the world's leading machine learning repository from which I have downloaded this particular data set. Detection of IoT botnet attacks, and they've named it as NBIOT dataset, neural based anomaly intrusion detection. So I've downloaded it. I'm just giving you an insight into the data set. See, uh, my system is running on a 16 GB RAM. Just think of how much time it is taking for this Excel to open. That is how uh, an general input might be. It is too heavy. It will have a lot of data so that the input cannot be fed to a program as such. So this is a 16 GB machine which is just running an Excel, and to open that Excel it takes at least 5 seconds. So now after opening this, this is the values. So if this values are taken as input as such, just think from A, this is one particular feature and it has 49,549 values just for one feature. And if you look at the total features, it goes till it is not just A to Z, and then from double A, double B, C, now it is at DK. So I have a count of this. It is actually 114 parameters. If you are including the class value, it is 115 values. So think of the complexity. 115 features into say 50,000 inputs. So your cross matrix would be very high. Similarly, if the traffic is of 1 lakh or 10 lakh or 15 lakh, then again it is very high. In that case, I need to handle this particular data set through a compression technique, and compressing it efficiently will tell me that out of this 115 features, say 10 or 20 features are more prominent, and if you use those 20 features for your computation, you might land up with an effective answer. So that is what an autoencoder basically does. So I've just given you an insight of how your input would be. You will not be able to understand anything. This is basically a traffic data set, a packet, how a lab with baby monitor, webcam, nine IoT devices in a lab. Traffic is this thing, and what they did is this is benign. This is benign traffic. What they did is they even corrupted this particular genuine devices. So what I do is I take a laboratory, I host 9 IoT devices, and I connect all these 9 IoT devices and I record my traffic, how they communicate, how a webcam captures video and how it sends back. So that is a traffic. How a thermostat reacts, how a baby monitor does. So this is the genuine pattern. So those are benign traffic. Now what I do is I corrupt them by using Mirai and Bashlight. As discussed, Mirai and Bashlight, if you are interested, just Google it out. What is a Mirai? Mirai, and Bashlight, Bashlight. You will immediately come across two terms. It is as on date IoT malwares, IoT variants. So what they did is they used these malwares to corrupt the existing benign, genuine traffics. So this is a set of genuine and this is a set of corrupted traffic. So you can have ACK traffic, sync traffic, scan traffic, UDP traffic. Similarly, combo junk, all this. So if I just open it again, this again will be very huge. And if you see, 1 minute. Just hold on. It takes a lot of time to open. I did it deliberately because you need to have an insight of how a traffic would be if it is corrupted. Think of this situation. If you're loading this particular data set into your machine, which is say 4 GB system or an 8 GB system, I'm just trying to open it out here in an Excel. That itself is taking me this much long. See here, this is not benign. This is one kind of Bashlight uh, incorporated malware traffic. So again, this again will have the same number of features, and the values here more or less will be the same values. So just by seeing, I cannot tell that this is a corrupted traffic and that is the original traffic. So I need to have a detailed analysis on every value on every feature. That is what your autoencoder does. So now I'm just closing it. Yeah. Now what we do is we are trying to develop a model by populating more than 10,18,298 samples. So if you just go to this link, what we have just now seen, you can have this. So it is basically 10,18,298 samples, of which 9 lakh and odd are benign and 49,548 are malicious. So if I give this as such, there will be a problem. The problem is it is biased. The output would be biased because I am giving out 9 lakhs of benign and just 50,000 of malicious. So a system is being flooded with 9 lakh benign and 50,000 of malicious. So the system will be learning only benign more. So obviously, if you give any malicious request, it will not be able to learn. So you have to downsample this model in 50:50 ratio. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to reduce it to 99,096, which means 49,548 as benign, 49,548 as malicious. And then this is the total of it. This is being inputted. So if you are trying to take out a machine learning model, it is training and testing. So I use 70% of this 99,996, which is nothing but 69,367 for training and 30,000 roughly for testing. And the matrices on which this sparse autoencoder are gauged is accuracy, precision, recall, number of epochs, and training time. So uh, I've just shown you one link where the data set was provided by the author. Now what we are trying to do is, my demonstration is on sparse autoencoder. So that particular data set, it was published by IEEE Transaction, Pervasive and Computing in 2019. That was the standard at 2019. They claimed that it took around 555 seconds for them through 800 epochs to reach 99.6%. So what does this mean? Means if I deploy an autoencoder, it detects 99.6% of the traffics efficiently. Maybe 0.4% might be an error, and it achieves that 99.6 by using 800 epochs. Epochs is nothing but iteration. In your looping, uh, in your technical coding language, we call them as a loop, but in machine learning terms, we call them as epochs. Epoch is an iteration. So in one iteration, I might learn that say 10 out of 100 features are good. In the second iteration, I might learn another two features are also contributing more. The next. So if I give more iterations, I probably learn more features, and I land up on a subset of features that are very prominent. So here, as on 2019, it was 800 epochs. But what I did is we proposed a sparse autoencoder, which was again more or less 99.6 and 99.7 is not that different. But where we substantially stood is we reduced the epochs. So if you're training your model for 800 epochs, 800 iterations, it would take 555 seconds. But now what we did is we gave out the same accuracy, 99.6 and 7, just with 100 epochs. So if it is 100 epochs, the training time is reduced. So when your training time is reduced, your detection time will get increased. So you can detect it immediately. So this is what is your sparse autoencoder. And we've already seen what basically a sparse autoencoder is. I'm just giving you another insight. So you might think like this is a kind of a theory session. Since it's a webinar, I cannot give you more practical inputs, but I'm trying to give you more details so that you can go and learn it out of it. So this was our Springer work, from which our 2019 benchmark of IEEE pervasive computing, which was 555 seconds with 800 epochs, got broken, and we gave a new benchmark. Say we can detect the same botnets with your accuracy with just 319 seconds and 100 epochs. So what I'm trying to tell you here is this autoencoder, sparse autoencoder, is much efficient than autoencoder, because this sparse autoencoder has a term called sparse penalty, where I set a value called penalty which is very close to 0. And since it's very close to 0, this doesn't get triggered. When it doesn't get triggered, it doesn't ignite and it doesn't fire for all patterns. So it gets triggered only to unique patterns. So those latent representations are learnt and documented immediately. So if they are learnt completely, obviously my accuracy will get increased. So this is how my sparse autoencoder that we are discussing now is better than the existing autoencoder. So I'm just giving you another insight. Maybe in another 10 to 15 minutes, I'll finish off the session. Please hold with me. This is an Amazon Web Service console where we deployed the sparse autoencoder, which we just discussed. What we did is we took an instance, and into that instance, we deployed an application, a Django application, and this sparse model. Then from my remote desktop, I'm trying to establish a connection to the instance, to the EC2 Amazon instance, Elastic Compute Cloud 2 instance. After establishing connection, I am trying to generate requests. So for your understanding, what I've done is I've given values to the packets. So 1 is basically the first request. 10 is basically the 10th request.